7:10. Shelby City Council meeting is called to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Seated, please. We're going to be having a roll call in a minute. It should be noted for the record that we will have 2 council members participating remotely during this COVID-19 pandemic environment, and so they are joining us by phone, and they will be taking part in the meeting by telephone. Mr. Martin is on a trip with family, and Councilman Martin is serving his country. So roll call, please, Mr. McCrum.
Mr. Robb. Here. Mr. Roberts.
Here.
Mr. Gates.
Here.
Mr. Martin.
Here.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Here.
Thank you. I'll now entertain the motion to dispense with the reading of the journal from August 3rd, 2020.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Gates to dispense with the reading of the journal from August the 3rd, 2020. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin.
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Yay.
Mr. Robb.
Yay.
Mr. Roberts.
Yay.
Mr. Gates.
Yay.
That motion passes. Public comment in this environment comes in the form of written correspondence to City Hall or to a council member. Did the council members receive anything that was to be shared during public comment? To the best of my knowledge, we received no communications from public comment at City Hall by 4 p.m. today, so there will be no public comment. Move on to reports from standing and special committees. The Finance and Personnel Committee met last week. Councilman Gates.
Thank you, Mayor. If my colleagues will take out the packet from the Finance Department, we will take a look at it. We're going to start with the back page. That is the detail about city income tax. The finance director reported, quote, "We're doing okay," unquote. What we want to do is to look down at the bottom chart. These are the monthly totals brought in by each per city income tax. If we look at 2020, we can see our high point was this last month in July, $531,000. And going back in previous years, the high point was May in 2019. July was the high point both in 18 and 17, and June was the high point in 2016. So, you know, there's some variation there. July seems to be the most common month, but there's any number of factors that lead to that. In 2018, the income tax department was down 1 person, and so it took a while to get returns open and checks cashed. They did much better in 2019. It's very hard to make a good prediction, but we do know that there's never been a high month for collections beyond July. So I think it's safe to say we are not going to have a month that exceeds $531,000 in income tax collections this year. It was reported that about, compared to previous years, about 2,000 plus or minus returns have not yet come in. The finance director reported that. Our question was, how does that compare to prior years? He was going to research that, so I'll defer to him now and see if he has an answer to that question.
Regrettably, I will have to get that for you.
Okay, all right. If we look at the top chart, and again, looking to see the total that had been brought in by July, we're kind of even for prior years. It's just going to be a wait to see. You know, there may be some people that got extensions you know, an extension upon an extension, you know, their returns aren't due until October. You know, we don't know how many of those that have been granted. But when you get an extension, you're supposed to make a payment anyway, and then you settle up when that's done. Going back to the first page of the packet, going to the second page, because here's where we want to take a look at something that's, I think, really good, and something that was brought up at the meeting by Mr. Martin. Here's where we can see a comparison of individual taxes, business taxes, and withholding. Now we can see, I'll start with the business. We can see it's up, you know, pushing 26%. But those taxes are income earned in 2019. So, you know, that's a lagging indicator. Likewise for individuals, you know, it's up to 2%. Well, again, that's on income from the previous calendar year. Withholding, on the other hand, we look at that and see that it's down, and we can say, oh my goodness, it's only down 6%, you know, in all of this hullabaloo. But again, that's on 2020 income. So if there were ever an apples and oranges comparison, this is it. Now, I don't know of any different way to do it, because it's money that's received in this calendar year. But you have to understand what the income is behind those payments. And, you know, that's, you know, it is what it is, but there's something really that we need to watch. You know, we can't expect that this business tax is going to carry us this year. My experience, and it is somewhat long, is that when there's a downturn in the economy, we really feel the impact on city income tax the next calendar year. We look at the recession and the downturn in '83. It came around and bit us in the backside in '84. And there are other times where that's happened. So, you know, we may say, well, it's not all that bad. Well, it's not all that bad right now. So, well, enough of city income tax. Let's turn to the very front page and we'll take our usual walk through. Again, looking at the general fund, we had cash, $1.1 million, encumbrances, $190,000, leaving free and clear $898,000. Looking at the cash balances this year compared to last year, you know, we are up. A lot of that, though, if you look over at and see what the income received, 62% of general fund income has been received the end of July, but only 49% of the expenditures. And the finance director attributed that to department heads really doing their best to keep their requests as minimal as possible. Going down to capital improvement, line 300, fund 300, $190,000 in the fund, 172 free and clear. We go down to 353, streets, alleys, and catch basins. Here, of course, is where paving is coming out of. We can see that $454,000 cash, but encumbrances of $358,000. Well, you know, we know that that's going to happen because, you know, we're going to be doing asphalt work here big time pretty soon. Utilities, the sewer fund, $294,000. Compare that to last year, $370,000. Get down to water, $267,000. Last year it was $212,000. But if you back up in water and look to see what the encumbrances are, free and clear is only $99,000. And that's you know, for running a utility, that's not a lot of money to have free and clear. Electricity, of course, we know electricity is down because we plan for it to be there. Last one I want to take a look at this page is hospitalization, 715. We have $598,000 in the bank. We have no encumbrances. Last year, we had 399,000, almost $400,000. So you can see we are significantly up this year compared to last. We talked about a couple options. One in particular is if it's a possibility of deferring payments into the hospitalization. We had done that a few years ago, and that was very helpful, and particularly with the general fund, as we were trying to get the general fund to recover, we were able to make defer payments because we had such a healthy balance. The deputy finance director says that, I'm not sure if it's hard and fast or a general rule, they like $750,000 in hospitalization before deferring payments. So whether it rises to that level and we might be able to defer November, December, or just December, whatever. But also this fall, of course, we find out what our insurance rates will be for the next year. So, it may be to the city's greater advantage to have some monies in there to start the year, that perhaps those payments might be lessened. Any number of things to look at, but that's a good place to look and see how we can save other funds money. Again, any fund that has payroll is paid into this hospitalization fund. So, utilities, general fund, what have you. Again, it's a benefit all around. As of the end of July, we had 58% of the year. If you look down at the very bottom, we brought in 55% of our income and 48% of our expenditures. So if you're looking for a real quick and dirty, your real snapshot, that's something to look at, is those 3 percentages. Moving along, again to the second page where we looked at the income tax at the bottom. Again, you can see the comparisons. For the total budget for this year, revenues exceed expenditures. In the general fund, revenues exceed expenditures. General fund expenditures are up about 0.7%. That was expected. Going to the next page, here's where we look at comparison of revenues and expenditures in the 3 utilities. In the wastewater and the sewer fund, expenditures exceeded revenues by $56,000. In water treatment, revenues exceeded expenditures by $69,000. So that's a move in the right direction. One would hope that would continue. And in the electric, again, revenues were less, but that's because we planned for it to be less. Going down to the bottom part, we can see that the 220 fund, these are the transfers from income tax to the various funds. You can see again the comparison between 2020 and 2019. Last year we had $54,000 in refunds. This is now it's $33,000. That could change. I'd like to think if there's any big refunds, those have already been taken care of, but one never knows. Next page is the cash and investment reconciliation statement. One thing that is well, let's look at the bottom line. We had in the city treasury as of the end of July, $14,592,879.21. One thing that has happened differently, before we have invested, the city could invest its money in CDs and in savings accounts. One thing that state law allows is for a subdivision to purchase the financial paper of other subdivisions of the state of Ohio. And indeed, the city of Shelby has done that. We have bought commercial paper issued by the Shelby City School District and by the Licking Valley School District. And I'll let the finance director at this point, give us a little bit more details about that.
Thank you. Yes, because CD rates are almost non-existent at this point, we were approached by our PNC representative about purchasing some CDs. Neither Amber nor I had done this before, so we didn't want to get too carried away. So we purchased $50,000 of a short-term bond for Shelby City Schools, and I believe it was $35,000 or was it $65,000? I'll have to get you that number of Licking Valley School Districts. Things. These are both short-term. I think both of them are about a year. So we're going to kind of see how this goes, and hopefully when these expire, CDs will be back in a more favorable light. I don't know if that will happen or not from other economic downturns, but so we're just going to try it out with reasonably small dollar amounts for our investments and just kind of see how this world works.
And we would find them where on this, I didn't ask that question Friday or Thursday, on this statement, they would be,
That's a good question.
you mentioned it was PNC.
Yeah, so in that column that has the 500,000 and then several 250,000s, they will appear in that column. We have not actually paid for them yet.
Right,
There's a
this
cost.
year, this month, yes,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's right.
Yeah, so you'll see that in the August financials.
Okay. Well, I commend the finance department, the director and deputy director for looking at another vehicle open to us, for a better rate of return, which benefits taxpayers. So that's commendable. Moving along, we see that very short report for the sort of Roush Fund, and of course the last page is the income tax that we've already looked at. We also had a presentation at the beginning of our meeting from Michael Burns with Baird and Associates about the refunding. I'll discuss that more later when the legislation comes up. That's a more appropriate time. Mary, you did make a personnel report. The police department, their potential interviews, or maybe I should say interviews for a potential dispatcher. There is an open patrolman's position, and candidates are being recruited for that. The fire department has an opening, and you reported that they are getting names for candidates there. You also mentioned about the CARES Act funds, and we do have legislation for that, so we'll bring that up later when the legislation comes forward. Mayor, that's my report. If Mr. Martin has anything to add, I certainly wish he would.
I do not, thank you.
Mayor, at this time, I move that the combined financial statement and the cash investment reconciliation statement, both dated as of 7/31/2020, be received, placed on file, and posted to the city's website.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates, a second by Mr. Martin, that the combined financial statement and the cash investment reconciliation statement, both dated July 31st, 2020, be received, placed on file, and posted to the city website. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Robb?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
That motion passes. All right, thank you, Mr. Gates, for that report.
Very well.
We'll move on to the Utilities and Streets Committee. They also met last week. Councilman Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. Utilities Streets Committee met on August 12th at 3:30 and discussed a few items here. The first one is the broadband feasibility study update. That broadband survey is now closed. Survey closed on July 31st. Vantage Point is now compiling that data collected from the survey survey findings. The data will be entered into the business plan and report. The competitive analysis is completed. The report is scheduled to be received the week of August 17th. We're reviewing the report next week, and then that final feasibility study report is scheduled to be presented to the Utilities Committee during the September meeting. We then discussed the alley between Weber's and as was occurring, and that is legislation on the docket this evening. So that was drafted by the library group. We discussed that, but we'll be discussing that further later on this evening. We got a report from the ditch petition update. The city officials met with members of the Richland County Soil and Water Conservation District to continue the ditch petition discussion. Representing the city, Mayor Shag, Councilman McLaughlin, Joe Geis, and Cranston. The meeting was held on Monday, August 10th. Takeaways from the meeting. The county soil and water officials have been walking the river to assess the maintenance inventory for the river. Maintenance inventory includes the felled trees, limbed trees, log jams, etc. Areas inventory so far has been from the North Ontario to the McGee Road area, and inventory is noted tornado debris along the river south of town. Per the county engineer, the county prosecutor is thinking that the private and public funds already spent to clean the Black Fork River cannot be used for the construction estimate for the ditch position, meaning the project is not able to jump to the maintenance phase of the position, and inventory to clean up construction phase is needed to be completed to populate the maintenance assessment. The ditch petition would need to start with construction and then go to the maintenance phase. So we're still working that out. And there was a determination starting at any point of decision. It was recommended to keep the designation points as originally stated from Mickey Road to Geisinger Road. Next meeting is scheduled for next Monday, the 24th. Moving on, the license plan property. There's the Outfit building demolition. Richland Engineering, Wallace Hansher Group, has prepared the bid specifications for the demolition of the following buildings: the machine shop, beer dock, cold storage area, the old ice cream. The bid specifications have been received. The engineer's probable cost of the demolition and site restoration is $146,000. Legislation is prepared for council to authorize the mayor to advertise for the demolition of the building. The legislation is scheduled to be presented at the meeting. Project funding will come out of Fund 602, the light deck reserve fund. $200,000 has been appropriated this year for demolition work. The diesel storage tank removal, plans are being finalized to remove the $10,000 gallon diesel fuel storage tank. The tank is scheduled to be sold. Per the sales agreement, the tank is removed by November 30th, 2020. Paving update. The Broadway Avenue, Water Street, and Wyandotte Drive paving project is scheduled to begin this month. A pre-construction meeting was held on August 6th. The contractors will begin the project with the new ADA program. The school year starting August 24th, the contractor is planning to start with Wyandotte Drive and hopes to complete the paving on Wyandotte before the start of the school year. If the paving is not completed before the start of the school year, the contractor has been informed on when the school year begins and the school hours. Shelley and Stan was awarded the paving project contracted price of $342,121.89. Income tax levy money is being used to resurface these streets. That's Fund 353. SAC, with streets, alleys, catch basins, 535. Contractually, the paving needs to be finished this fall. electric demand during the stay-at-home order were as follows. March was down 10.7%, April 9.15%, May 8.58%. One would think this is a good thing. Less business in G equals less spend. That part is true. Unfortunately, the majority of power that was purchased was from the base load power resources, which are the most expensive energy resources in our portfolio, and did have a lower price power to offset the cost. as I stated, only 2.3% of our total cost. All right, solar hydro energy proposal. Conversations are still ongoing with an investment group that has interest in our AMP Hydro participation share. The investment group has been introduced to AMP officials. Both parties have been working through the legalities on how the investment group can legally and contractually control our shares in the AMP Hydro project. If our hydro shares can be legally assigned to the investment group, a purchase power agreement would be entertained to purchase solar energy to replace the hydro energy. This would be a packaging agreement. Our share of the AMP Hydro project would be exchanged for the investment group's solar energy shares. This is a very simplified version to obviously a very complex agreement that is designed to bring relief to our purchase power costs. Like we talked about, that $141 per kilowatt hour that we're facing. On down to the September meeting, we'll be going over the broadband feasibility study, and we're also going to be looking at the water capital improvement surcharges, the water treatment plant. That last note payment comes in January of 2021, so we'll be looking at that improvement surcharge. Mayor, that is my report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Martin. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Martin in regard to his report? Mr. Gates.
A couple of questions about the ditch petition. One thing we heard, I think, was perhaps the last meeting, the question was still up in the air whether tributaries to the Black Fork would be included in this. Has that question been decided?
I really don't think it has. I think the next meeting, that really has to be panned out, because at the very last meeting, that was some of the conversation we had, Mr. Ensman, I'm looking at Mr. Ensman here, that, yeah, how far back at these fingerling streams do you go, or is it just strictly the Black Fork? So that has to be hashed out, I think, before we ever move forward, you know, with the scope of the project. But so that's a long answer to a short question. No, that it has not been determined yet.
Let me share the concern I have. If tributaries are not included, then it will be a much smaller number of property owners that will have to bear the full cost of the project. And I think about here in Shelby, there's a storm sewer in front of my house on 4th Street. And eventually it drains into the Black Fork. But in the First Ward, for example, there's the Hartman-Barga-Heiser ditch. So properties on Sunset, Shelby Avenue, Jeffrey Avenue, that drain into that, if we don't include the tributaries, they're out scot-free. In the Second Ward, we have Tooby Creek that runs through there, that drains a lot of that ward. And again, if we don't include the tributaries, those folks, they're free to go. Likewise, the 4th Ward, we have Seltzer Creek that drains a huge part of the 4th Ward. So I think that, you know, obviously they're contributing water to the Black Fork proper. And would certainly have benefits if the Black Fork is done. I think very strongly we need to include the tributaries to the Black Fork.
And then I think it'll be fully, well, I know it'll be fully discussed. And maybe two issues. Anyone in that watershed that is a contributor to, no matter what means it gets to the Black Fork, whether it's by creek or just simple runoff, I think anybody living in that watershed will be assessed. Now, how far back we're going to go up through those tributaries, there's probably two different questions there.
Well,
So I think that's the issue we're going to be talking about in the next meeting.
I think, Mayor, your statement that if you're contributing water to the Black Fork, you'll be assessed. And so by default, your statement includes the tributaries.
Well, it includes, they'll be charged, I guess, in the assessment because they are contributing through that tributary, but whether this project is actually going to physically go through there and clean out those tributaries was a secondary question.
Okay, well,
It's
so
almost to our advantage we don't.
that then is a difference. You know, does the project include cleaning out the tributaries, or does it include simply this watershed from Mickey Road to Geisinger Road?
Right.
So, in that case, people in the first, second, and fourth wards will get to contribute to it, as well as people in the third ward.
Sure.
The other question I have, and I have a map very roughly that shows that watershed. And the largest part of any subdivision that would appear to be in that would either be, probably a toss-up between Cass Township, Louis Grove Township, and Jackson Township. So since they are much larger geographically than the city of Shelby, why is it then that there would have to be a determination if Shelby City Council has to enact the legislation? It would seem to me that, for lack of a better word, the big boy should be the one who's passing a legislation or a resolution to get this project going. I'm asking, why Shelby?
I think a number of reasons point to us. We had the largest study that's ever been done on the Black Fork was done here by Muskegon. That study, as I understand, is now available to us. Did you understand that too, Mr. Geis and Mr. Hensman? That we can go back and get some figures that were used for that study for this. And as far as probably any location that would receive a great benefit to the Black Fork flowing as it should, with as much velocity and volume as it should, is probably the city of Shelby. So it seemed logical to the district that we would be anyone can put this on, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it can be an individual, it can be a city or a village or a township, but it just seemed like we had a lot of energy going into this a number of years ago, and then maybe we could pick back up on that and be the one at least gets the ball rolling.
When the petition is filed, do I understand a bond has to be filed at the same time?
Is that your understanding, Mr. Hensman? Yes. Yes.
And the estimated cost of that bond would be, not that anyone may not, or not that anyone knows that at this time, but
Mr. Hensman?
In our understanding is around $5,000. That dollar amount could change though.
Yes.
like, I'm not sure, you know, what the bond necessarily covers. You know, I'm open to hearing that.
Mr. Hensman, do you have?
I believe it originally was $1,500 and it could increase to $5,000. There's some discussion, I believe within the county, that could have this increased. But I believe right now it's $1,500. I correct myself, it's $5,000. I believe it's $1,500.
Well, maybe I know I'm getting ahead of myself on this, but there are, you know, there's legitimate questions that need to be answered.
We're taking note of those, thank you. Any further comments or questions on Mr. Martin's report?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Steve McLaughlin here. I just want to add, thank you, Garland, for those questions. This Friday, I will be walking the Black Fork in Shelby with the folks with the Richland County Soil and Water, so that's all I got.
Okay. All right, thank you. Be careful.
Yeah, I'll get later.
All right. I don't think it's quite that deep. I mean, if you go down, okay. All righty. Well, hearing no further comments or questions, thank you, Mr. Martin. We'll move forward to Public Works and General Operations Committee. Councilman Rob.
Public Works and General Operations Committee met on August 4th. Discussed several items, a couple of which you're going to see in legislation tonight. First being that the bid documents were ready for the demolition project at the old beer dock. You have those bid documents in your packet and also the legislation. The second item was a discussion on amending Chapter 1466. That's the freeboard legislation. That's residential properties, new and substantial improvements to those. Mr. Geis can fill you in a little bit more on that. We also had a discussion on a social media post that appeared concerning the conditions of Shelby City Parks. The post was made by an individual who felt that the conditions of the park weren't up to standards. This individual worked for a park district, not the Shelby Parks. He just thought that they were dirty and the equipment was not being properly maintained. The general consensus at the committee meeting was the park department does a good job with the equipment, and must also be noted that, you know, when this post was made, the parks were just newly being opened. The equipment was just being put back into service. You guys really didn't have time to do a whole lot of maintenance. Everything was chained up, wrapped up, and put away, so to speak, so it couldn't be used. So I think you know, the post was not something that the individual needed to point out. I mean, you see trash laying in the grass, I think a good citizen would pick that up and throw that in the trash can, but you know, those are just my thoughts. And the last thing we discussed was numbering of houses. Mr. Geis pointed out that this ordinance we have concerning that was last visited back in the 1920s. It does need to be updated. We'll take a look at that and expect to see something on that in the future. Mr. Geis was going to check other communities in the area and see how they're handling that. That's my report.
Thank you, Councilman Robb. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Robb in regard to his report? All right, thank you. Hearing none, we'll move forward then to the Safety Committee. Councilman Roberts.
Thank you, sir. Safety event on August 5th at City Hall. Chief Thomas started the meeting by letting us know we're still waiting to see if the Shelby Fire would be receiving anything from the COVID grant. And also told us that unfortunately that the amount that we may get would be decreased because overtime would not be covered by that grant. So redundancy here, Shelby Fire has a vacancy, and a group of candidates is being collected right now as we speak. Fire hydrants, flushing and painting would be ongoing. I thought the flushing would be done shortly after that meeting, and the painting would begin or recommence. Health News, Ms. Conrad reported that she is dealing with a couple of nuisances, and COVID cases were discussed. At that time, there were 52 cases, 40 resolved, 12 active, and 2 hospitalized. Moving on to police news. Again, redundancy, 1 officer has retired, so the search begins for replacement, and we still have that dispatcher position open, and they are trying very diligently to replace that. Jill had a good inspection from the health department, and it was determined that all jailers should have a bloodborne pathogen training. And public service announcement, I guess, that came out of this meeting was there was an issue with dogs being walked at the reservoir number 3, not on leashes, and of course that's a violation. And you know, if somebody's seen with their dog not on a leash up there, anywhere really, you know, I mean, you know, it could result in a fine. So, you know, if we can spread that word a little bit, keep your dog on a leash, because that's what you're supposed to do. That is my report.
Thank you, Councilman Roberts. Are there any comments or questions in regard to Councilman Roberts' report? Let me just make one question. Chief Combs and I are scheduled to have an interview with a candidate for the dispatcher's position tomorrow morning. All righty. We'll move on to reports of city officials. I will make my report very brief. Again, been busy with typical mayoral duties for the last couple of weeks. On August the 4th, I attended a Richland County Mayor's meeting in Ontario. Also, our police chiefs met with us in a very informative meeting for all. On August the 8th, I traveled to the Mansfield Office of Community Action Commission to meet with State Senator Larry Othoff and other agency officials. The effort was made to let him know of the needs in the Richland County area for the underserved firsthand. On August the 9th, I participated in the Richland County Regional Planning Commission Executive Committee meeting via Zoom. And I received an email today from Ms. Bridget Coles, who's a community engagement specialist, and she was excited to let me know and let our community know that there will be a free pop-up testing site for residents of Richland County and surrounding counties this Saturday, the 22nd, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Richland County Fairgrounds. Walk up, drive up, testing will be set up there. Testing for this initiative will be available for individuals with or without symptoms. The test has no out-of-pocket cost to the patient, and individuals of any age are able to access the test. Minors will need a signed consent of a parent or guardian. So we should be seeing something in the media here, I would imagine, tomorrow. Maybe something came out today, I don't know, but that's a great thing. I want to thank Ms. Coles for working to bring that testing site to Richland County. So that's my report. Are there any comments or questions for me? Hearing none, we'll move forward to Mr. Crum, our Finance Director.
Thank you. As we've kind of transitioned out of the normal income tax season and onto the extended tax return season, the tax clerks are working on that sort of thing. The deputy director and I have kind of shifted towards, okay, where can we reduce our costs for the remainder of this year and next year and ongoing in the future, anticipating a drop in our revenue sources so that we don't have any major issues come the future. Obviously, the potential refunding of the bonds is a big project and a big cost savings, but we can discuss it more at that point. But the estimated amount is about $700,000 in cost savings. And the real key is, our funding for how we're paying that bond off is tied to our income tax. So as income taxes drop, the potential revenue source for paying off that bond also drops. So it would be helpful to reduce that. As was discussed in Finance Committee, we're purchasing some bonds to increase some revenue because of the interest income that we were earning, which was close to $100,000 a year, is now almost completely gone. So we're looking into that. We've been in discussion with several banks, and we have started getting some quotes as far as potentially switching things around to reduce our service charges, which are rather expensive. We're working on that. We've been working with Mr. Geis and Mr. Ensman and our insurance agent on potentially changing some flood insurance for the utility building because that property has been changed in the floodplain. So we're hoping to work that out and get some cost savings there. And then, of course, there's various CARES Act programs. The fire department has some potential funding. Richland County Health has some funding that we've been working to show expenses for. And then, of course, the larger one that is on the agenda tonight through the Richland County Commissioners. So we've been keeping very busy trying to figure ways to reduce costs for the future and find additional revenue sources to help the oncoming drought. That's my report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Crum. Are there any comments or questions for Mr. Crum in regard to his report? Hearing none, we move forward to Mr. Eisner, Law Director.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no report this evening.
Okay, very good. Any questions for Mr. Eisner, or? We'll be hearing from him a little while later, some of his other piece of legislation perhaps. Mr. Geis, Project Coordinator.
Thank you, Mayor. I emailed all of you about the paving project. I got a call late today from the contractor. They're gonna start working on the curb ramps tomorrow. Unfortunately, the gas company didn't do all their locates on the Seneca portion of it, but I did inform the contractor we really wanna get that done before school starts next week. The paving companies will pave while school is going on, so they're not conflicting with bus traffic and so forth. So we'll work through all that. Our West Main Street sewer, there's still some electrical issues getting completed. And as soon as that's done, then we'll be finishing that project and going on to the next step with the, going through the auditor and so forth with the assessments. Still working on the contracts with the contractor who won the lateral project. And I did meet with the firm for our downtown enhancement project. They have a very tight timeline coming up here, getting the next stage of the plans to ODOT for their review, so that'll be coming soon. And the bid opening for East Main Sewer is next Friday, the 28th. So that's all I have, Mayor.
Okay, Mr. Geis, are there any comments or questions from Mr. Geis in regard to his report? Hearing none, we'll move forward to new business. Any new business to go up before council this evening? Mr. Gates.
Mayor, Councilman McLaughlin sent out an email regarding campers parked in driveways, and I wondered if he wanted to bring that up at this time.
Mr. McLaughlin, do you want to bring anything else up about the campers and driveways and so forth?
Oh, I had to take this off the news. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, since the police have been working on the abandoned vehicle project, and it's been in the papers, I've had a couple of those just mention that to me, so I thought I'd put that out in an email to y'all, that maybe we should look into that at some point here in the near future.
Mr. Gates?
If there's a specific case about, some derelict camper parked in a driveway, that's very different than a broad rule that would ban all campers parked in driveways.
Hey, Garland, I spent some time trying to look that ordinance up. Where is that mentioned?
Mr. Rob?
This came up a couple of years ago from a complaint. I believe the gentleman on Sunset was complaining about a neighbor's camper. We looked into this, and basically, if it's in a driveway, it's in a driveway, and as long as it's not, as Mr. Gates pointed out, a junk vehicle, where else are you going to put it? You can't park it in the yard. Some of those are pretty expensive, up to $60,000, $70,000, and I guess if you don't like a particular model of car and your neighbor has one parked in the driveway, you have reason to complain. So, like I say, it's been brought up in the past and kind of dealt with, and I don't see anywhere else to go with it.
If I may, Councilman McLaughlin, maybe contact Mr. Geis tomorrow. There is an ordinance that does speak to it, but it's kind of in general, but it does kind of describe what is allowed within the city. And it would seem like those types of, as Mr. Gates described, those types of placements of vehicles is apparently according to our ordinances. So, but that might be, Mr. Geis, maybe you might send it out to everyone if you would, please. How does that sound? Okay, then we can kind of all review that. But yes, this came up about
I'll just add, I've had a philosophy for years that not everything that your neighbor does that annoys you is illegal, nor should it be.
Thank you. We will, I'll have Mr. Geis send that out and we can kind of all review that together. All right, any other new business? Move to old business, the future use of Main Street Fire Station. There has been no change in the status there. I've not heard anything from community EMS at this point. Still waiting on, again, the business transaction there to be completed. The exterior carbon maintenance on 59 West Main Street, I did look at it today, and there is a small amount of brick spalding there that doesn't seem to be any change in the structural part of the wall that I can see, so that remains unchanged. And again, still looking to market that building, see how things will develop from there. Is there any other unfinished business? If not, move forward to legislation.
Orders number 18, 2020, providing for the issuance and sale of bonds in a maximum aggregate principal amount of $5,300,000 for the purpose of refunding the debt service cost savings, all or a portion of the $4,830,000 the city's outstanding Municipal Justice Center improvement bonds, Series 2011, dated as of October 5th, 2011, that are stated to mature on December 1st in each of the years from 2022 through 2025, 2031, and 2036, authorizing and directing the call for redemption of all of the refunded bonds, authorizing the execution and delivery of a bond registrar agreement and a bond purchase agreement with respect to the refunding bonds, and an escrow agreement with respect to the refunding of the refunded bonds, and declaring an emergency.
I move that the rule requiring that an ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Robb that the rule requiring that an ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Robb?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
That motion to suspend passes.
Move the ordinance be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Robb for the passage of ordinance number 18, 2020. Discussion. Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mayor. At the Finance Committee meeting last week, Michael Burns was present. He is the Managing Director for Public Finance with Robert W. Baird and Company Incorporated. They are the underwriters for our current bonds. In a nutshell, what we're looking at is a refinancing of the outstanding bonds. Let me just go through and share some highlights from the presentation that you made. If you have the handout, it's on page 1. They were PowerPoint slides that were on paper. Details of the existing bonds. They're 25-year bonds. They were issued in 2011 and would have final maturity in 2036. So we've been paying on those bonds now coming up on 9 years. It's to our advantage when we look at some interest rates. It's very clear it's to our advantage to do this. It was pointed out that the current bonds are tax exempt for federal income tax. And of course, once if something's tax exempt, then that carries through on your adjusted gross income as a general rule, right down the line, state and city income taxes. These new bonds would be taxable, which took me by surprise. But the reason for that is that the interest rates are so low that the difference between what would be taxable bonds and the non-taxable is so minuscule as to not really to make any difference for an investor. So, you know, very strange that a municipality would be issuing taxable bonds. On page 2, you can see the potential refunding of the bonds with some detail. In the middle there, it says Baird and the city will put together a rating presentation to give to Standard & Poor's. Standard & Poor's is the rating firm that's probably the best, well-known. There's others, but right now we have an A rating, which you can see there is good quality. If we could get that up potentially to a AA, that would be high quality. And you know, we're going to start down at the bottom. If you're BB+, those are junk bonds. And to get someone to buy junk bonds, you have to offer them a greater interest rate because they're risky. And so people have to have something to compensate for the risk, and that's higher interest rate. So you can see as you move up the Standard & Poor's rating, the interest you're going to pay is going to drop. And again, if we can go from good quality to high quality, that will certainly pay off. Page 3 of the handout, if you look over on the left side, the different colors, the gold those are 20 years, 20-year bonds, then 15 and 10 and 5 down the way. And you can see that here we are, when you get clear over to the right side, we have the lowest interest rates that we've had in 30 years. So we would be looking at roughly 15 years because we've been paying off for 9 years, but somewhere you can kind of get an idea where we might be. Now, as we all know, if anyone who buys mutual funds or stocks, past performance is no guarantee of future returns. Things can change very quickly. As you can see, when the coronavirus pandemic hit, you can see everything went, for those of us who had IRAs, those went down the sewer in March, and then likewise, interest rates, went sky high. Well, now things are, are recovering, and so we see the, if you took those lines and kind of extended them past the COVID thing, they're pretty much on target as to where they would have been anyway. So that's why we're looking at this. We have the lowest interest rates in 30 years. On page 4, looking at the the right-hand column, the Finance Committee scenario that was presented to us last week, with information as of the end of July, we could see a potential cash savings to the city of $705,000. That's $705,000 we're saving the taxpayers of this municipality. Potential. So that's the number one thing from page 4. Page 5 has month by month the proposed next steps. You can see the left-hand side, some things have been checked off. The first thing in the first bullet point, the city to pass bond ordinance to proceed with the refunding. Now, this ordinance that we are passing does not require the refinancing. It authorizes the financing. Basically, it authorizes the mayor and the finance director to do that. And again, they will use their best judgment, their due diligence, and see if it's to the city's advantage to do that. But again, we are authorizing it. We're not requiring it. We're not directing it. In September, there's in August, the preliminary financial statement. In September, to prepare the bid rating presentation. And I believe he said that would be by conference call and might be as long as 2 hours, Mr. Crown, I remember. So it's detailed. There's a group of people that sit around and we'll look at everything on paper and start throwing questions at people. You say this, tell us more. Probably somewhat like an oral argument, in an appellate court. You have everything in writing and you start throwing questions at you. So, that's the long and the short of it. I will, you know, and my colleagues know this, everyone knows this, I know enough about this process to be dangerous, okay? I am by no means any expert on this. We have no, with all due respect, everyone, we have no such experts here in this room. You know, we rely upon Baird as our underwriter, and the law firm used to be Squire, Sanders, and Dempsey, but they've changed the name, but Squires is the bond counsel that we retain. So that's that. Let's take a look at the ordinance itself. There's a few things I want to bring to attention. If we look at page 6, for example, down toward the bottom, paragraph, small letter, well, it's a 1. Mandatory sinking fund, redemption of term bonds. Just a reminder to the trustees of the sinking fund, you are a public body, and if you are required to meet, that meeting must be posted in accordance and held in accordance with the open meetings law in the state of Ohio. I recall at one such time, you know, and is routine. I think the sinking fund trustees have to be asked, do you want to buy these? And routinely, the sinking fund trustees say no, but that's in the loop. On page 14, section 11 at the top, provision for tax levy. There shall be levied on all taxable property of the city, in addition to all other taxes, a direct tax annually during the period the bonds are outstanding, and an amount sufficient to pay the debt charges on the bonds when due, which tax shall be not less than the interest and sinking fund tax required by section 11, blah, 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 blah. Don't be scared by this, because if you look at the last 4 lines, it says there, in each year, to the extent the income from the city's municipal income tax is available for the payment of debt charges on the bonds and is appropriated for that purpose in accordance with the city's covenants herein, the amount of the tax shall be reduced by the amount of the income so available and appropriated. So, you know, even though it says there shall be, we have this caveat at the bottom. It says as long as there's an income tax, we don't have to do what's in the first part of that. So don't be fearful that, you know, something would go amiss. Although I will say that, God forbid, and I say that reverently, if something would be to such an extent that the income tax would not cover that debt, that then becomes the first obligation of the general fund. So, enough said. Section 12 there, the city does not intend or represent that the interest on the bonds will be excluded from the gross income. So there's where it says that you know, these will not be tax exempt, that they will be taxable. The only other thing I wanted to say is on the very first page down at the bottom, the definitions and interpretation, it talks about authorized denominations. Does that mean Presbyterians or Baptists or Lutheran and stuff? I chuckled when I saw that. So, Mayor, that's where we're at with this. Again, you know, huge potential savings for the taxpayers of this community.
Well, thank you for that very helpful explanation. And I think you know more than what you're putting on. Is there any other discussion in regard to ordinance number 18, 2020? Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Ron?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Resolution number 18, 2020 passes.
Ordinance number 19, 2020, amending chapter 1466, flood damage prevention, section 1466.24, use of development standards for flood hazard reduction, D4, residential structures of the codified ordinances of the city of Shelby, Ohio.
Move for first reading.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Robb and a second by Mr. Roberts for the first reading of ordinance number 19, 2020. Discussion, Mr. Geis.
Thank you, Mayor. We received notification from the Community Rating System, which is a program through FEMA for communities who do extra things, extra ordinances, or well, you know, walking the streams, reporting, and all kinds of different things. But we are a Class A community, which means our residents get 10% reduction on their flood insurance. They sent out a memo stating that communities who do not at least have a 1-foot freeboard for residential structures who building new, doing a substantial improvement, which means more than 50% of the market value of the structure on doing construction like a addition or whatnot, or if it was substantially damaged by flood, fire, any other act of God. So if we don't enact this 1-foot freeboard, we will lose one class rating and go back to a class 9, which means everyone in the city would have to pay 5% more on their flood insurance. So that is the whole impetus of this, to change the ordinance so we can maintain our class 8 and have cheaper flood insurance for everyone.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Geis, you know, in years past, some folks have known what that level is, 10.85 or whatever, and they maybe go 3 inches above it or 6 inches above it, but this would make it that you go 1 foot above it to freeboarding, or 1 foot above that, and that's how we'll maintain that type of rating.
Correct. But it's been my experience when anyone has done anything, I've informed them of the vast insurance break they would get of going to the 1-foot freeboard when they are doing something. So normally they would at that point, just because of the substantial savings they would receive.
Right, very good. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Ordinance number 19, 2020 passes its first reading.
Ordinance number 20, 2020, affirming funds received from the County Coronavirus Relief Distribution Fund may be expended only to cover costs incurred by the city of Shelby, consistent with the requirements of section 5001 of the CARES Act as described in 42 USC 801D and declaring an emergency.
I move that the rule requiring that an ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Roberts that the rule requiring an ordinance be read on 3 separate occasions be suspended. Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
The rule to suspend passes. The motion to suspend, I should say, passes.
I move the ordinance be taken up and passed. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Roberts for the passage of ordinance number 20, 2020. Discussion. Mr. Gates.
Mayor, in section 3, there is a blank. I don't know how council can pass a piece of legislation with a blank.
If I may address two things for that section 3, I just came up with the title, the Local Coronavirus Relief Fund, not the Reflect Fund, so maybe council wants to change that if it's so inclined with unanimous consent. Number 2, assuming the monies are paid over to us from the county, I believe they're gonna have to go into a separate fund that we need to create. This got put on late Friday afternoon without consult with the finance director and such, so I left that blank for council to fill in after speaking here tonight, so we can put that into a specific designated fund for this purpose.
Mr. Gates.
Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that in place of the blank in section 3, the words a fund be placed, and in that same line, the word reflect be changed to relief.
Is that?
Yes, I asked unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent.
You can get really technical, put the period inside the quotations.
Oh, I'm not gonna go there. Okay, heard the, by unanimous consent to amend or correct section 3 by placing in the blank the two words "a fund" in section 3 in that blank space, and then correcting and deleting the word "reflect" and replacing it with "relief." So that is what is being suggested by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, the ordinance will be amended thusly. Any further discussion? Mr. Gates?
Mayor, I'm looking, and I compared the section 2 with section 5. Section 5 is, our standard that we have, but it seems that the section 2 seems to, put some meat on those bones, as by way of a metaphor. So I'm wondering if existing section 5 should be deleted, existing section 2 be designated as section 4, and then section 3 becomes section 2, and section 4 becomes section 3.
Sounds like a unanimous consent motion to me.
I ask unanimous consent to do that.
So it's been suggested by unanimous consent then that actually section 5 would be deleted, correct?
Correct.
And then section 2 would become section 4.
Yes.
Section
3.
3 becomes 2,
Correct.
and then section 3 becomes, section 4 becomes section 3.
That's my unanimous consent
Yes.
request, Mayor.
All right. That is the changes that will be made by unanimous consent. Are there any objections to making that, those changes or those amendments? Hearing none, the ordinance will be amended thusly. Any further discussion? I'll just say real quickly, and thank you, gentlemen, for moving on this, or at least considering it this evening. We're looking at approximately $198,300 some dollars to be coming from the county to the city of Shelby. It's $198,300 and some odd dollars there. And you saw the handout sheet of how those monies can be invested within our community through the CARES Act. So that we need to have that money encumbered by October 15th, so we'll be moving rapidly and presenting some ways we believe we can invest in our community with the CARES Act funds. Mr. Gates.
Just a reminder for the finance director, he'll need to ask for an amended certificate of resources from the county for this.
Amended resource.
Certificate of available resources from the county budget commission. It's boilerplate, but if you don't do it, it's one of the first things you get dinged on in an audit.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Barton?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Ordinance number 2020 passes.
Resolution number 37, 2020, authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Service to accept the alley paving proposal from Midstate Blacktop, Inc.
Move the resolution be taken up and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Gate for the passage of Resolution 37, 2020. Discussion? Mr. Roberts.
This is something that's been a couple of years coming, and I just want to thank Mr. Ensman and Ron and the guys for choose to approve this tonight, it will, there will be a lot of appreciative people on the west end of the second floor.
Mr. Gates?
When is this work expected to be done?
Mr. Ensman? When is the work expected to be done?
It'd be towards the later of September. If the legislation passes the CD, it'll stick to 30 days. It'll start, only 31 days from today.
The 30 days was my,
Yes.
that was the real, if you wanted to start it next week, couldn't be done, but at the end of September, that's past 30 days.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Resolution number 37, 2020 passes.
Resolution number 38, 2020, approving the plans and specifications and authorizing the mayor as Director of Public Service to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 36 Mansfield Avenue Building demolition project within the city of Shelby, Ohio.
The resolution be taken and passed.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Gates for the passage of Resolution 38, 2020. Discussion? Mr. Gates.
Mayor, I was, looking at the 6 pages of plans, and I was grateful to note that it's an aerial photograph, and it's clearly labeled with what's to be demolished and what's not. It's very clearly says, "Do not disturb" over the new fire station. I'm sure that Chief Thompson are grateful for that. So,
Yeah.
just a few things, prevailing wage rates applied, but there was a number of references to Davis-Bacon, and that's federal. So I guess my question is this I can't imagine why this would be a Davis-Bacon project. There's no federal dollars involved, but,
Mr. Gates.
There's not, so it would be state prevailing wage.
okay. But there's reference to both, so, okay.
If I may clarify that, this is, probably you found that in the plans in the back or whatever. This is kind of a boilerplate from the engineer firm that we use. He does do a lot of different funding sources through ODOT or federal funding, so that's probably why they're both listed, but this will definitely be state prevailing wages.
Thank you. Mr. Gates.
Here on page 2G, item number 29. No contract agreement, grant application, or other document required with the signature of the Director of Public Service shall be effective unless it contains the genuine signature of the mayor, I believe it should be, or acting mayor, as ex officio Director of Public Service. I ask unanimous consent that the word acting be inserted into, as the fifth word between or and mayor.
Okay, it's been brought to the table that the word acting should be placed in front of the word mayor, 2G, after the word or. Mr. Geis.
Mayor, that is the exact language that is on ordinance 7/2013. I think what it's saying is by the mayor or the mayor as being the Director of Public Service, because by charter you are the Director of Public Service. On other statutory cities, Director of Public Service would be signing the contract. Not, but that is the exact language that's on that ordinance.
Well, I'll stand corrected, but as President Reagan said, trust but verify, so.
We will do that.
The other is page 5D. This is where people sign. It talks about the solicitor's approval. And the word solicitor is used twice. I ask unanimous consent that the word solicitor be changed to Director of Law.
5B, by unanimous consent, should be changed from the word solicitor stricken and replaced with director of law. That is the amendment to be made by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Hearing none, it shall be so amended. Any further comment? Thank you for your review. Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yeah.
Resolution number 38, 2020 passes.
Resolution number 39, 2020, declaring the intent to vacate an alley running perpendicular of Main Street between lots 577 and 578 in the city of Shelby, Ohio.
The resolution did not pass.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Roberts and a second by Mr. Martin for the passage of resolution 39, 2020. Discussion? Mr. Gates.
Mayor, the draft easement agreement that I had worked on would have required the grantee, in this case Weber's, to pay a sum of $100 annually for use of the alley as for extension of the bar. What if we vacate the alley, and I know this is a resolution of intent, but let me share, the concern I have that I think needs to be discussed, is we have a unique asset of the city that up to this point we've talked about vacating, and that the property owner would benefit by the city's largesse. I think that we need to consider that. It's one thing to vacate an alley that exists only on paper, a grass alley, or an alley that gets little or no use. But again, here we've got, as I've said before, we have an asset of the city that we would give up permanently and transfer to a private entity, which will use that, and I'm not faulting him for this, would enhance his business. I think that's something we need to take a good, serious look at. The other thing is that we had talked about, whether we would, vacate. Well, I'll back up. Normally when we vacate an alley, it's cut down the middle. And that's what this attachment was that we got today. But we've talked about the possibility, getting 5 foot of that alley does Weber's no good at all. So, I don't know if this drawing that we have here tips our hand at this point, is, could be, I don't know if it has any consequence to what we're doing here, but again, we have this attachment to the legislation that clearly shows the alleys to be cut in two. Which is very different from the discussion we had 2 weeks ago here.
Any further discussion? Yes. Yes, Ms. Barton.
So we had talked about it, we decided to keep it split down the middle as opposed to what we had talked about earlier, because then we kind of stay out of basically the business between the two property owners at that point. And instead of having to mitigate that, we can go between, if there needs to be easements or agreements between those two property owners, and they can handle that business themselves. Versus
Mr. Gates?
So thank you, Mr. Martin, that makes my concerns better. Let us play Solomon, and we'll let the two parties, work it out. But still in that alley, we have pavers, I think we have a street light in there, we've got, other street furniture too, that, we need to decide at some point, do we get that? Again, it has value, and whether, if we cut it in two, then we have two property owners that we are giving a valuable city asset to.
Any further discussion on this resolution or points brought to the table?
Mr. Mayor, McLaughlin,
Yes, sir.
you guys were breaking up a little bit in and out, and I think it was Darwin I heard ask a question about some of the property, such as the bike rack, I think. What's gonna be done with that again? Or the lamp, the city lamp and all?
I think that was Councilman Gates' question, and I don't have the answer for that. Yes, Mr.
Again,
Gates?
this is a resolution of intent.
That's right.
It doesn't commit anything, it simply starts a process. But I think somewhere in this process, again, this is not your easy grass alley that we're vacating. This is much more complicated.
Mr. Rob?
I think I understand what Councilman Gates is getting at there, and I agree with him. This does start the process, and we have several other steps that we can go through to get some of those questions answered. But those questions do need to be answered during that process.
Thank you. Mayor?
Yes, sir, Mr. Martin. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, you guys are kind of breaking up there, so hopefully you guys can hear me loud and clear. But Mr. Insman has, and I apologize, I kind of skipped over that in my report. During the Utilities and Streets Committee meeting, Mr. Insman did reference the city-owned property, and we understand that we need to figure out what to do with those property items as well. So that is on our conscience as we go through this.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
Resolution 39, 2020 passes. We've placed on the agenda for miscellaneous business. Any miscellaneous business? Mr. Gates.
My question is for Mr. Councilman McLaughlin, when he plans to return to Shelby so that he can sign this legislation that we passed this evening.
Mr. Gates, I will be back in town Friday.
Okay.
Then I have a question for the finance director regarding this bond legislation. Is that soon enough?
Yes.
Thank you.
That they can make that work.
Good question. Thank you. Any further miscellaneous business? Mr. Gates.
Move council adjourn. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Gates and a second by Mr. Roberts for adjournment. Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin?
Yay.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yay.
Mr. Rob?
Yay.
Mr. Roberts?
Yay.
Mr. Gates?
Yay.
The motion to adjourn passes. Council adjourns at 8:47.